Mark, do you just say when we're going to start? Because that's
I've started the recording. I've started the recording now, so the script should take you through the start of the meeting.
Just to start. Okay, so
yes.
I've got it here. So sorry about the light and such like, but and I think I've got all my phones off, I hope. Let me just see what other council one off. Let me just check. Sorry, if you just bear with me, I don't want them ringing with it. Okay, so welcome to those in attendance at this remote meeting of the local review body of Aberdeen City Council. I'm Councillor Stewart and I'll be chairing the first review before the LRB today. I'm doing this one because it's located within Councillor Bolton's ward. Councillor Bolton will chair the remaining 3 reviews. Please note the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. Please also note that we may have members of the public observing today's proceedings. Can I ask those who are observing today's meeting to keep their microphones and cameras switched off throughout? Can all members of the review body leave their cameras on but mute their microphone when not speaking? As the local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that they should not leave the room meeting during the consideration of any of the reviews. This meeting has been convened in response to 4 requests for a review of the decision taken by the appointed officer under the council scheme of delegation. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents as listed in the notice calling the meeting. I will now ask Mr. Mark Masson, the Assistant Clerk, to confirm which members are in attendance to consider the first review and to outline the procedure to be followed in the conduct of the reviews. Mr. Masson.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. So in attendance today we have Councillor Stewart as the chairperson, Councillor Mason and Councillor MacDonald for this first review. So in terms of the procedure, members have the procedure note which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within the review process operates. From this, it is clear that the first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure. And by that, it is meant without further information or representations. To assist, I feel it would be helpful to mention the following. Firstly, that the regulations governing the local review process require that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review. Secondly, that the focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. Thirdly, to note that the modernisation of the planning system, which included revisal of the planning appeal process, of which this local review body is part, removed the previous right on the part of an applicant to insist on a hearing and replaced that with the local review body, providing them with the power to choose a procedure which more accurately reflects the facts and circumstances of the individual case. And lastly, that the guidance issued by the Scottish Government's Chief Planner in 2011 stated that reviews by local review bodies should be conducted by means of full consideration of the application afresh. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you, and I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, turning to consideration of the first review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the formation of a dormer to the rear of 1 Bishop's Court, Bishop Dams Road, Aberdeen, planning reference 211012/DPP. We'll now hear from the planning advisor in attendance, Ms. Lucy Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would point out that Ms. Green's attendance here today is to provide us with necessary professional planning guidance because she's not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Ms Green will not, however, be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Ms Green, would you be ready to describe the application from the appointed officer's decision and the case for review?
Yes, thank you, Convener. I'll just share my screen.
Can I just say, would it be helpful if I put my microphone off as well as everyone else just now, just in case there is any whatevers? So I'll just do that. I'll keep the camera on, but I'll put the microphone off.
Can you see the presentation? Fine. Yes. So this relates to a request for a review against the application that was refused under delegated powers for the formation of a dormer at 1 Bishop's Court, Bishop's Dams Road. And the review has been submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. The applicant has noted on the notice of review that no new matters have been raised. In terms of the procedure by which the review will be conducted, the applicant has expressed the view that the review may proceed on the basis of the relevant information only. So I'll provide some background to the case before handing back to the convener for members to discuss how to proceed with the case and ask any questions. So this is the location plan showing the application site here. This is the edge of West Hill. And on this plan, you can see that the application property is part of a former steading that has been converted. And it occupies the northwestern wing of Bishop's Court, which is just on the east side of Bishop's Dams Road to the southeast of West Hill and the Aberdeen City Council and Aberdeenshire Council boundary. Just show you the overhead of the property. It's just there where the star is. We'll just move on to the street view image. So it's a single-storey granite-built house with concrete tiles, a concrete tile pitched roof, and it dates from around the late 19th century. And the steading was subdivided sometime in the late 20th century. This part of the steading has a very small 10 metres squared lean-to extension to the north side. It's just hidden behind the hedge there. That's the roof plan. I'll just run through some of the slides showing you the plans. So this is the existing property with the small lean-to extension. And then the existing floor plan. And existing elevations. So it's this side, the north elevation, will be impacted by the proposal. The planning permission is sought for the formation of a dormer on the dwelling's rear northern roof slope. The dormer would be of a box design. That's the ground floor as proposed. This is the dormer as proposed. It would measure 2.4 metres in height by 7.7 metres long and 2.7 metres deep, and it would incorporate 4 windows on the front face with an apron below and a narrow solid panel in the centre. The windows are white UPVC, and the dormer's front and side elevations would be finished with larch timber cladding, and there'd also be a white UPVC fascia along the top. The dormer would match the width of the property's existing single-storey rear lean-to extension, and it would be built off the wall head of the original steading building, with its front face sitting approximately 500 mm up from the eaves level of the single-storey extension. Its side elevations would be set in from the gables, and it would sit approximately 350 below the ridge of the pitched roof. The dormer would allow for the creation of 2 bedrooms and an ensuite within the roof space of the dwelling, which would be accessed via a new internal staircase. I'll just move back to the first floor plan so you can see the bedrooms within the dormer. In terms of the reasons for decision, these are stated in full in the decision notice, which is in the agenda pack, and can be summarised as follows. The proposed contemporary dormer design, scale and materials would be architecturally incompatible with the traditional historic steading building, and therefore contrary to supplementary guidance on the conversion of buildings in the countryside. Secondly, that the dormer would dominate the roofscape, contrary to the householder design guide. And thirdly, that it would be prominently cited as not of the highest design quality and would have a detrimental impact on the Greenbelt, contrary to the design policy and Greenbelt policy. The applicant, these reasons are set out in the notice of review, along with a statement, both of which are in the agenda pack. And the following points were made. That the former steading was converted into 5 properties, and there have been several alterations over the years since. Photographs were provided of a flat roof extension and dormers on the neighbouring former farmhouse. Secondly, that the box dormer is required in order to provide head height within the attic conversion. That it's not technically feasible to form 2 smaller dormers and provide access. That the materials, the larch cladding would turn silvery and would be appropriate within the Greenbelt. That the original form of the building would remain and that the dormer is to the rear. And lastly, that the applications should be determined on their merit, taking into account the surroundings, and including the Kings Hill Commercial Park, which is in Aberdeenshire, the Cormac Park, which is obviously Aberdeen City, and then Arn Hall Business Park, which is partly in the 2 council areas, but the area that's built up at the moment is in Aberdeenshire. In terms of consultations, there was no response received from Cults, Fieldside and Miltimber Community Council. There were 2 notes of support with no particular comments made. So I'll now hand back to you, convener, for the panel to decide how you wish to proceed.
Okay, thank you, Ms Green, for the presentation. Colleagues, we now have to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members will note that the applicant has stated in the review document that no further procedure is required before determination. So members, do you feel that you have enough information to make a decision? You can request that a site visit be undertaken, that further written information can be provided, or that a hearing arranged. So what I would be saying from the chair's point, there's enough information there to make a decision. So I've got here that it's Councillor MacDonald and Councillor Mason. Councillor MacDonald, sorry, it's just the sun the way it is in here, but
Thank you, convener. Yeah, to be honest, I took the opportunity to do a drive past. I didn't stop and look at the property, but I did go and make myself aware of where it was situated. So I do feel that I could go ahead today with the information that I have in front of me, as well as going just to the vicinity of the planning application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, convener. A couple of questions first, if I may. Which are technical. Can someone describe for me? I think I understand what a hayloft dormer looks like, and the second is a definition of a wall head. I mean, I think I know what that is, but I just wanted it confirmed.
Oh, is that before you make a decision about whether we need a site visit or not? Okay, I put Mr. Masson. Is that allowed? Are we allowed to do that at this stage?
Yeah, I'm sure that Lucy can give an answer to Mr. Mason, Councillor Mason, for that.
Okay, just sticking to the rules. Okay, Miss Green, are you able to provide an answer to that?
Yes, in terms of, I'll just go back to the slides. So built off the wall head, you can see that the dormer is just built straight off the actual wall rather than set back on the roof. That's
the wall head is the top of the wall. Okay, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Got there. And the hayloft
dormer would just be a narrow, sort of vertically proportioned type dormer, built off the wall head, usually, but obviously narrow, so it would have a vertical proportion. Taller would be wide.
So that's okay. That's satisfying then. Okay, right. I now have enough information, I think.
Okay, thank you for the clarification on that. So if we're in agreement, Councillor MacDonald and Mason, that we can make a decision on it, I think we now go back to Ms Green, and if you are able to hear from you in relation to the relevant policies and considerations for this review.
Yes, thank you, convener. I'll share my screen again.
Okay, thank you.
So the property sits within the Greenbelt in the Aberdeen Local Development Plan. Greenbelt Policy presumes against development in general, with several exceptions. So one of these is for proposals for development associated with existing activities in the Greenbelt, and they'll be permitted if the following criteria are met. Development within the boundary of the existing activity, which this obviously is. Small scale, the intensity of activity is not significantly increased, and any proposed built construction is ancillary to what exists. For all exceptions to the presumption against development in the Greenbelt, there is the requirement that proposals must be of the highest quality in terms of design, siting, scale and materials. Moving on from that, there's Policy D1 on design, which seeks high quality standards of design and refers to further supplementary guidance. So in this case, that would include the conversion of buildings in the countryside guidance and the householder design guide. So turning to the conversion of buildings supplementary guidance, I've just summarised some of the points from that. So the property was originally a steading which was converted into houses, and the first point in the supplementary guidance that's relevant is that vernacular buildings mustn't be changed to the extent that they lose their original form, so that the best conversions reinforce the original architectural qualities of the building. Secondly, there's talking about openings, limiting the number of openings in the external walls or the roof plane to be characteristic of traditional agricultural buildings, so that the new openings should be kept to a minimum, with domestic scale windows being minimised. In terms of dormer windows, it states that those of an urban style look out of place on steading roofs and should be avoided. And lastly, where a dormer is unavoidable, it should be built off the roof head in the style of a hayloft. So moving on to the Householder Development Guide. The general principles that proposals should be architecturally compatible with the original building and that approvals predating the guidance don't represent a precedent. In terms of dormers, it states they shouldn't dominate or overwhelm the original roof, and that on traditional properties, traditional historically accurate dormers would be sought on public elevations. So my last slide, in terms of zoning, the question is, do members consider that the proposed works would adversely affect the character of the Greenbelt as set out in the policy? Is the design of sufficient quality? Does it accord with the policy on design and the supplementary guidance on the conversion of buildings in the Greenbelt and the Householder Supplementary Guide? And is there an adverse impact on residential amenity? So finally, does the proposal comply with the development plan considered as a whole, or are there material considerations which would weigh against that? Okay, thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any further questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Ms. Green, for that presentation. Members, do you have any questions? Okay, Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I just wonder about the thing that's, I suppose, that's concerning me most is around the quality and the design of the dormer, and I just wondered what would be acceptable. I mean, that white PVC fascia, if you like. I understand that, you know, the larch might dampen things down a little bit, but it did seem very in your face fascia, if you like. And was there any consideration given to looking at different styles of windows? Or I don't know if that was part of the planning process, or if it was just, this is what we're going to do in the application.
Oh, I think you're on mute, Ms. Green.
The case officer would have had discussions with the applicant. If I just go back to the slides showing the dormer. So obviously the accommodation that they get in the roof with this dormer, if there were two dormers, narrow dormers as is suggested by the guidance, obviously that would restrict headspace in the bedrooms. So that would have been discussed with the applicants, and I think one of the issues might be that the door would open and potentially there wouldn't be headroom to get in to the bedroom, but it would depend how the dormers were designed and positioned. But what would have been discussed would be the narrow hayloft type dormers. I mean, potentially two, but you know, you can see that it would restrict headroom in the bedrooms. Look at the, maybe illustrated more on the cross section here. You can see that if you just have the two narrow dormers, the bedroom space would be compromised. So that would have been the discussion that took place.
Do you have any more questions, Councillor MacDonald?
No, thank you, convener.
I see a hand raised, so I assume that's Councillor Mason.
Right. No, my concern is the same as Councillor MacDonald in terms of the quality of the build, and particularly that white PVC heading on the dormer seems to be very dominant. And in fact, the proposition there is far too dominant to the roof itself. I mean, it will be all you will see from the road will be the dormer. You will not see the house, which has been improved with the dormer. So I'm at the moment I can't see any justification for this particular application, but I'm still open to be convinced if other arguments come forth.
Okay, so I have a few questions actually as well. So firstly, I would like to ask, how far is this property from neighbouring properties?
Let me show you on the, obviously the other 4 houses within the conversion, and
Yes,
then there's a house next to it as well. Can you see that slide? So there's the original farmhouse to the south, and this house to the north, then the other 4 properties within the steading.
But so where I'm coming from is out with that,
Okay.
and there's been no objections from those properties. And I'm asking this in relation to what kind of real impact it would have on the area, and for those that might see it. That would be the first one. So does that look like half a mile or a mile maybe to the other property?
Have a look and see if it's. I mean, I'd be guessing, say, 500 meters, but
okay. It was just it was a question I had. Okay. The next question I would have is in terms of the size of the fascia, the white PVC. Obviously, the windows look. You can see how the glass looks, but in terms of the fascia, to me, in terms of the drawing and what I would observe and what I would see with other planning applications, the fascia doesn't look any bigger than you would see on any other application. And I note, as almost a supplementary to that, that the silver larch, it does fade and blend in, and similarly that is what was used at the rendezvous at Forest Road, which was approved using that larch. So if you can just maybe, I kind of still work in inches, to be honest with you. So would that be about 8 inches, 8 inches deep, or 10 inches?
Something like that. Yes. Let me check the.
So the actual white face that is actually just running along the top of the windows.
Yeah, it's 350 mil. So.
Yeah. So that's really the bit that seems to be in question, is just one white strip. So it's not at the sides of the prop. It's not at the sides. And it's not running along the bottom, because that's the larch. It's just the top, the one white strip. Okay. It was said that the design was not of the highest design quality. Why is that? I'm not meaning why did the person propose what they're proposing. I'm asking, why is the council as a planning authority saying it's not of the highest design quality?
Well, the case officer has referring to the Greenbelt context and the fact that it's part of a traditional steading, and that this would be more of a contemporary style box dormer.
So it's not that the design is actually a poor design, it's taken in the context of a Greenbelt area.
That's what the case officer was saying, yes.
Okay. My understanding is when properties and even offices have maybe go for I'll just say an extension or a change to their property, that quite often, so I'm going to take, for instance, the areas around Queen's Cross. I'm talking pre-pandemic times, so no influences there. So you might have a very traditional granite property, but then at the rear, you have something that's really quite modern. And you, I mean, I know one particular property, it's all glass at the back. I also know that when I had Bill done at my own house, we were told that sometimes it's better not to make it look and blend in as if it was part of the original building, but to make it look actually different. And that seems to be more acceptable to the council as a planning authority. I may not have worded this in from a technical point of view, Ms. Green, but am I right in what I'm saying?
Yes, with traditional properties at the rear, we would have approved contemporary style extensions on that side, on the rear private side of properties.
Okay, and also I don't think I'm wrong in what I was told, and that it, well, no, I know I'm not wrong. I was told it's to make it quite different. So, and rather than, for instance, making corners be completely flush with an existing building, sometimes you were told, as you had to dent it in to make it, if that makes sense, I'm seeing a message coming up. I wasn't aware that that was permitted. Mr. Masson?
Sorry, can I just remind everybody, all observers and guests in the meeting, not to raise their hand. You are unable to participate in this local review body meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Masson. I'll stop there. I see Councillor MacDonald's got her hand up.
Thank you. Thank you very much, convener. I don't have any strong views on the northeast on any two Greenbelt as set out in the proposals. I do think it's, you know, it's on the existing footprint. I think the development, I would call it pretty small scale. It's not a you know, intense activity increasing or anything like that. And it's just really that the point around the quality of the materials. I think the design I would be okay with, and I take the point about the in situ. When I went along past, I was struck that actually the first thing that you see is not particularly this building, it's the one before, and there are quite a few buildings in that little nestle, and it is on a little sort of, you go up a tiny little bit and so on. But I don't think in the grand scheme of things that the design of the dormer would be you know, I think it would be acceptable, but I do question that very stark white fascia, and I just wonder if I could ask the planning officer whether there would be any condition that we could attach, that might be looked at in terms of what could be achieved. I also wanted to ask about, you know, are there any considerations or discussions made with Aberdeenshire planners when it comes to things that are probably, you know, abutting a different local authority? And I suppose my third point was around part of the whole hamlet, if you like, if you want to call it, or the steading conversions. There's quite a lot of tree cover. Would I be correct in thinking that? It certainly seems to be in the pictures, and that's certainly something that I thought as I was there, that, you know, that did soften some of the starkness that you might think that there would be in the plan. If those three things could be addressed, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Ms. Green?
Yes. For this scale of proposal, we wouldn't normally have consulted Aberdeenshire. So that's that point. We could attach a condition in relation to materials, either all the materials or to be confirmed, or just the UPVC fascia. And in terms of tree cover, there's what looks like Leylandii hedge. It might be another form of tree, but it looks as if it's cut to the level of approximately the eaves at the moment, but obviously that would grow.
Thank you. I can see where you're going with your question, Councillor MacDonald, and that's why I wanted to emphasise the point being made when it said it's not of the highest design quality. It's not that the application is not of the highest design quality, it's within the context of the green belt. So there's nothing wrong with what they're proposing. I suppose it's a matter of taste in terms of the fascia, but to confirm, the drop of the fascia is about 8 to 10 inches running along the top of the I won't say the roof, the line of the windows. So it's one strip. So that's really what seems to be coming down to. Councillor Mason, do you have any other questions?
Yes, I have. The boundary, the Aberdeenshire boundary is where?
Ms. Green, you're on mute.
It's along the burn. I can go back to that plan. Just double check that. Yeah, yes, it's along the Bordiac burn. Okay, and in terms of Aberdeenshire, is that green belt? Is that bit just there inside their area? Is that green belt to them as well as us, or is it just green belt to us? I believe the edge of it is green belt, and then it obviously abuts the edge of all of the sort of office developments in West Hill. On the other side of that B road. Right, so not far away. This area is green belt. Not far where it goes into urban areas, so to speak. Yes, I'm just thinking now in terms of the continual dilemma we have in terms of areas which are increasingly under pressure from urbanisation, which are currently greenbelt, and what is a sensible way of carrying forward properties on the border, so to speak. But I'm conscious of the, given that it is greenbelt, then greenbelt it is, but there's the pressure. But I'm also very surprised as the number of accommodations units there are in that development. I mean, five households in that setting is an awful lot of people, and I can fully understand the pressure to make the individual developments
that much bigger by putting in such a dormer. But on balance, I'm still worried about the dominance of the box dormer in that location and in that position.
Okay, so members, do you have any more questions, or do you want to go into a further discussion, or do you feel that you're ready to make a determination? I would just say one thing myself is I'm very minded, whether it comes under the exact title of planning, that we are now moving in very difficult times and properties are not selling and people have to make changes to their property in order to accommodate families. And as can be seen, if there were two small dormers, then that would not allow appropriate height room. So it wouldn't really help anybody living in a property like that. And where there is a proliferation of properties that are for sale in Aberdeen, I think planning is going to change eventually, maybe in terms of legislation, what's allowed and what's not allowed. And we as councillors can make that representation. In terms of, you're going to end up maybe moving in an area where you're going to have solar panels, and that's going to become much more acceptable, part of a green and carbon neutral approach. And you might see that more dominant in the West End. Things are definitely changing. You can perhaps see where I'm going with this, that for myself, I would find it very difficult to produce a negative response to this application because of one white strip of fascia, albeit 8 or 10 inches depth and the length of the property, because that I think is what this is actually coming down to. But that would be my decision. In fact, I'm at my decision. So if you want to have any more discussion, because I never want to stifle any form of discussion or debate on something, because this is actually someone's life property we're talking about. So obviously, we must give this due deliberation. Councillor MacDonald?
Yeah, I'm going to make my decision based on what is with us in the here and now, to be honest, convener. And I agree with you. On balance, I would be supportive of this application, but I would want conditions attached to it. I wouldn't want to go ahead with the application as it sits at the moment. I can accept, and I take Councillor Mason's point about the large scale of the dormer, but balancing that with the opportunity to actually have a meaningful space within the building to use it to its extent. I think in this particular case and the siting of this property and so on, I would be comfortable with that. Where I'm not so comfortable is with the materials, and I would be asking if we would consider putting a condition on, if we deem to approve the application, but put a condition on about improving the materials of the build, that would be considered, if that was possible. I'd like to propose that.
Well, we can definitely do look at that, but before that I would concur, what I would say is it's all very well to put on a condition, but it has to be a condition that is actually going to be able to be expedited, because if we were to say something that's not available or something that just isn't doable, then that's not going to really help. So we need to go back to Ms Green and ask, is it possible? I mean, if you're saying, Councillor MacDonald, that you don't want the white fascia, is it possible to have something other than the white fascia? Is that, I'm not a builder, so is that possible to have something else?
I mean, I think white fascia, white PVC, is there anything we can put in as a condition, Ms Green, that would soften the impact of the visual of the dormer?
Yes, I mean, you could look at the colour, and look at different materials for that. For the actual depth, 350 mil, I believe that's needed for the insulation that's necessary to put in the roof. So I wouldn't say that you could necessarily reduce that depth. But colour and the actual covering. I mean, we would usually ask people to submit details of what they would propose. I mean, say asking for a particular type of colour rather than stipulating an actual material. It would be better to get them to propose something that would be, is it something darker that you would look for?
That was certainly my views, that it would be more in keeping with what steading might have looked like. And I take on board, you know, that it might probably have been better to have 2 dormers, but I wouldn't be pushing for that. But I would certainly be pushing to have, whether it's a, you know, a brown or whatever it is, that it would nestle in better than the white.
Well, I'm glad you're in agreement with me, Councillor MacDonald, about having 2 dormers, because it's going to produce a property they're not going to be able to do anything with those two rooms. I'm just kind of minded about putting on something too prescriptive that doesn't allow the applicant to progress. Miss Green, is when you say a colour, I mean, does that white fascia, does it come in colours? Is it, are we putting on if we were to apply a condition, is it as a condition that can be fulfilled in order for them to progress with the planning application?
Well, it wouldn't necessarily have to be UPVC. We could say a colour to match, confirm a material and a colour to match the roof, for example. As far as I'm aware, you can get UPVC in different colours, but whether you can, you know, absolutely match it to a roof, possibly not, but it would come in different colours.
So I'm looking.
Well, I would be very happy with red or blue or something. You know, I think that's the point. It's something in context of. I think the condition would be to make it something in the context of the steading, the traditional look of a steading.
And say the applicant can't come up with that. This is what I'm saying, because I can see this could go around in circles, that if we are minded to approve, and I am minded to approve this application, I do not want to approve here and put on a condition that they can't fulfil. That's what I'm saying. So is it that we're going to say that the applicant has to look at a colour that is more in keeping in terms of the condition? But I don't want to say something that is going to be so prescriptive. It's not going to happen for them.
Convener, I can say something.
Of course, I didn't see your hand.
We are in a situation where there is a green belt, and you know, it is not an urban area, and therefore there are, by definition, going to be constraints on what can be done in the area, you know, and presumably the owner, whatever the developer, was knowledgeable of that when they bought the property in the first place. So the constraints which are in existence are in existence. I mean, I, as it stands, I would not approve the thing because of the dominance of that dominant window. You're right that if there was smaller dormers, there would not be such facility inside the building, would not be anywhere near as good. But on the other hand, in some ways they have to bear that responsibility. However, if we're going to go ahead, which with the dormer as stated, then we have to do something to protect the greenbelt area and the quality of build. And there should be no reason why the materials overall, including the larch, should not be in a colour and material equivalent to the building roof itself. I mean, you can get artificial slate-looking tile tiles, and you can get small slate tiles, and I have them on my house. They're very small, and you can design it such that it covers all the area other than the glass, and they blend in very well indeed. So I mean, if that was a condition, I would go along with allowing this dormer. If that condition was not in place, a full coverage of every frontage, as it were, covered with the right colour to match the roof, then I would be refusing unless that condition is in place.
Councillor Mason, thank you for that passionate address, and I actually agree with you. So if we can go to whether it's a vote or whether we're just going to say that I will move that we approve the application subject to a condition with the fascia to blend in more appropriately with the building. Councillor MacDonald, can you agree with that? Does that
a little bit more technical input perhaps from officers? I would agree with that, Councillor Stewart.
Obviously, with technical input from officers, that's for them to deal with. And Councillor Mason, are you happy enough with that? Well, you said you were, but just for the recording.
Yes, if the coverage of the frontage, large and everything, was consistent with the colour of the roof and the property generally, then I would be happy to approve it with that condition, and it must be a strong condition.
Okay. Right, if we're in agreement, so the application would be approved with condition of the materials with the technical input from officers, because that's their job, that it be something that is sympathetic to the area and the green belt. Are you happy with that? Okay, thumbs up. Okay, thank you very much. So the application is approved. Thank you. Subject to conditions. Thank you. So I will be leaving the meeting now, Mr. Masson. I might rejoin it later on as an observer, if time permits. Thank you very much for your deliberations. Thank you, Councillor Mason. Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Thank you, and officers that I'm seeing in the background. Thank you very much. Bye now.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Councillor Bolton.
Morning.
Hi. Morning. Okay. Good morning. I'm Councillor Bolton. I will be chairing the remainder of the meeting. I am joined by Councillors MacDonald and Mason for the next review. However, Councillor Bell will replace Councillor MacDonald for the final 2 reviews. So turning to consideration of the second review today in respect of a decision to refuse the application for the erection of a detached 1.5-storey dwelling with associated drainage works and access parking at Glendale, Kirkton of Skene, Tyrebagger Road, Aberdeen, planning reference 200463/DPP. We'll again hear from the planning advisor in attendance, Ms. Green, who will provide us with the with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would again point out that Ms. Green also attends today to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance, because she has not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Ms. Green will, however, not be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development, and in her effect, her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Over to yourself, Ms. Green.
Thank you, Convener. I'll just share my screen with the presentation.
It's there, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So this relates to a request for review against an application refused under delegated powers for the erection of a 1.5-storey dwelling at Glendale. Sorry, mate.
Are you? Oh, are you able to make the slides a little bit bigger, Miss Green?
Yes.
Thank
Sorry.
you.
that okay, Sandra?
It's probably gone
Perfect.
slightly off the edge. Right. The review has been submitted with all necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following the decision, and the applicant has indicated that there are no new matters raised in the review submissions. So in terms of procedure, the applicant has expressed the view that review may proceed on the basis of the relevant information only. So I'll provide some background to the case before handing back to the convener for members to discuss how to proceed with the case and ask any questions. So the site is located in the relatively remote Clinty Woods and accessed via a forestry track from the B979, the Tyrebagger Road, which is approximately 1 kilometre to the northwest of the site, at a point close to the public car park, which is provided for recreational users of the forest. And the main part of the site includes the ruined remains of a small cottage. Just show you, that's the aerial view of the site. The car park is over here on the site. This is taken from Google Maps. This is the cottage, which is without a roof, and these are outbuildings. So the main part of the site, which includes the ruined remains of the cottage, appears to be of 19th century origin, and the various outbuildings and ancillary abandoned garden ground. The cottage was last occupied in 2008 when it was fire damaged. The walls are constructed of locally sourced granite and no part of the roof remains. The outbuildings are a variety of materials: granite, rubble, timber, concrete blockwork and corrugated iron, with sections of roof remaining, as you can see. The majority of this historic house site is undeveloped land and its boundaries are rather unclear. There are mature trees of amenity value lying to the north and east of the site beyond a burn, and most of the site is level. There's a steep north-facing slope just to the south, and it's surrounded by mature conifer forest trees. This results in some shading during winter, and there's a core path running along the eastern site boundary. It's the existing site plan, just showing the track out of the site. In terms of planning history, there is no relevant planning applications. There have been some pre-application advice issued, which is referred to in the review in around 2013 and again in 2017. In terms of the proposal, a house would be erected on the site following the demolition of the remains of the cottage and outbuildings, and the proposed house would be sited at the north end of the footprint, slightly overlapping the footprint of the existing house. Plans show a house of 1.5 stories and contemporary in design. So that's the ground floor. The upper floor with 3 bedrooms and the elevation. The ground floor would be similar to that of the former cottage and would sit approximately at a level 1.5 meters above the stream channel to the east. It would measure 6 meters wide by 17 meters long. There'd be 3 bedrooms, as you can see. It would propose to be clad in larch. It's also proposed that there would be a new septic tank and surface water soakaway located within the former walled garden to the west, and new car parking and turning area would be provided to the east of the house. You can see that that's just in this area here where the new access track would be taken just cutting across the corner there. The existing access to the public road via the forest track would be retained, and there'd be a new section of access track created within the forest to the north of the site, which is outside the area controlled by the applicant. I can just go back to one of the plans to show. So that's referring to this short section here. At the moment, the track goes up, and then that track joins it at a point further north. So that's the new link shown there. So that would provide improved access to the house, but it would be largely reliant on the use of the existing forest track. The site boundaries of the house site would be defined by new post and wire fencing and existing blockwork walls. A total of 3 trees within the main part of the site would be removed as a result of the construction works, and those include a mature copper beech, a willow and a western red cedar. And the location of those was shown on that plan. The 3 trees are circled in red. It's just showing a cross section through the house and the tree survey. Turning to the reasons for refusal, which are written in full in the agenda pack, but these could be summarised. The first reason, the existing house has not been used since 2008 and there's no essential need established, so the proposal doesn't accord with the Greenbelt Policy. Secondly, the proposal would detract from landscape character and conflict with recreational use by the public. Thirdly, there would be the introduction of vehicular traffic along the track, which would conflict with its use as a trail and erode the function of the green space network. The fourth reason would relate to the remote location and the likely cause dependence on car travel, which wouldn't constitute sustainable development and would be contrary to the policy on active travel. And lastly, there's insufficient information on the impact on trees of the access, and that's referring to the link that is proposed outside the applicant's land and outside the site. For the applicant, the case is described in the statement of support, and this could be summarised as follows: that the proposal is of a scale and character previously indicated as acceptable. I think that's referring to pre-application advice, and no grounds to conclude that residential use has been abandoned. The proposal consists of sustainable redevelopment of a brownfield site supported by the Strategic Development Plan and Scottish Planning Policy, and that's referring to the presumption in favour of sustainable development. The statement confirms compliance with various other policies in the adopted LDP, including on trees, and Greenbelt Policy in the proposed plan, which allows for the replacement of vacant houses in poor condition. And the applicant states that there are no objections to that policy and that their view is that the proposed plan outweighs the extant LDP in that regard. In terms of consultations, there was no objection from the Roads Development Management team. They were happy with the parking provision and that the new access was acceptable given that it would be on a private road. No objections from the waste team. In terms of flooding, there was a flood risk assessment carried out, and there was no objection from the flood team. They noted that the green burn runs within the site.
Lucy, did you mean to take up another slide there?
No,
Oh, okay. No, I just wanted to check.
I didn't have these on a slide.
That's okay. Thank you.
The Forestry and Land Scotland, they advise that the proposed access passes through forestry land, and that the grant of access rights is conditional and would require compliance with a range of stipulations. The SEPA had no objection based on the flood risk assessment. Shell and INEOS Forties pipeline systems, there was also no objection from those consultees, nor from the Health and Safety Executive, and no response from the Community Council, which is Dyson Stonywood in this instant. There were no representations. So I'll hand back to the convener at this point for the panel to decide how you wish to proceed.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Green. We now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members will note that the applicant has stated in the review documents that the local review body that the review could proceed without further procedure. Members, remember that if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, you can request that further written information is provided, a hearing can be arranged, or a visit undertaken. Councillor MacDonald.
I'm happy to go ahead with the information that we have in front of us today, convener.
Okay, thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Councillor Mason.
I have enough information.
Okay, that's
at the moment anyway.
okay. Thanks very much, Councillor Mason. Okay, and I'm also satisfied with the information that's been provided to allow me to take a decision. As members feel that they have sufficient information, we'll now hear from Ms. Green on the relevant policies and consideration for this review. Ms. Green.
Thank you, convener. I'll move on to the policy considerations. Just share my screen again. Okay, the site lies within the Greenbelt, where there's a general presumption against development, and there are various categories of development that may be acceptable. So to look at a couple of these, that the first one is for proposals for development associated with existing activities in the Greenbelt, permitted only if the criteria are met. Development within the boundaries of the existing activity, the small scale nature, intensity of activity not significantly increased, and constructions ancillary to what exists. One of the other categories is for the replacement on a one-to-one basis of existing permanently occupied houses in the Greenbelt. The first criteria within that is that the property should have been continuously occupied for at least 5 of the 7 years immediately prior to the date of the application. The second section is that the replacement house occupies the same site, or where permitted replacement houses are on a slightly different site, the original house would require to be removed. And the third category, replacement houses should be of a scale, design and external appearance that contributes to the visual character of the Greenbelt. And that's emphasised by the general paragraph in there about highest quality design, scale and materials within the Greenbelt. There are various other relevant policies. The NE 9, which refers to access and informal recreation, which states that new development shouldn't compromise the integrity of existing recreational opportunities. The site falls within the Green Space Network, which promotes recreational wildlife access and landscape value of these areas. And the site also lies within a local nature conservation area. The policy on trees and woodland, which seeks to protect trees and woodland, that contribute to nature, landscape, amenity, and the character of the area. There are policies on managing the transport impact of the development and also on sustainable and active travel, which state that new development must be accessible by a range of transport modes with the emphasis on sustainable and active travel. Within the proposed plan, there's the Greenbelt Policy that's mentioned by the applicant, and that allows for one-to-one replacement of existing houses of poor quality. So members may wish to consider whether this is in fact an existing house in relation to that. Scottish planning policy, as has been mentioned, has a presumption in favour of sustainable development. So turning to my final slide, members should have regard to the local development plan and any other material considerations which they feel are relevant to the application. That would point to either overturning the original decision or dismissing the review. And the key points of relevance are the Greenbelt Policy. How do members view the application in relation to Greenbelt Policy? How does it affect the character and appearance of the building within the Greenbelt as set out in Policy NE2? And further considerations would be the impact on recreation, on the landscape character, on sustainable travel and on trees. And overall, does the proposal comply with the development plan when considered as a whole, or are there material considerations which would outweigh that? And I'm happy to answer any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Green. Questions from Ms. Green? Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you very much, convener. The waste team have said that the waste would need to be picked up at the road end at the car park, presumably. The application said. Just give me an idea of how far that is. I didn't quite get that spatial view of how far the house is from the car park.
Kilometre. Sorry,
a kilometre.
1 kilometre. Yeah.
Thanks. And just for my own understanding, in terms of the private drainage that would be envisaged for this property with a septic tank, it says that I suppose it then soaks away into the land, and that's presumably normal practice in countryside dwellings of this nature. If that's what was envisaged, would that be correct?
Well, the foul drainage would go into the septic tank, which would then need to be emptied, and the surface water would go into a soak away. I mean, we would have sustainable drainage for housing estates now as well within the urban area where those can be accommodated. It would be the foul drainage that would be different within this area.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to get my head around balancing. You know, the applicant seems to think there's a presumption in favour of sustainable development, and I'm just trying to get that balance in my own head between what is sustainable living, I suppose, going forward for a house on this site in situ where it is, and I just have concerns not just around travel, but around those other areas of just how a house would operate. I don't know if that was more of a statement than a question, to be honest. So I'll leave it at that just now and see if anybody else has got any questions.
Councillor Mason.
Yes, the one overriding issue is whether one should allow a house there at all because of the previous occupancy or not. Well, if we don't provide planning permission in this instance, what will happen to the site? What status then does it have?
It would remain undeveloped unless there was a proposal came forward that complied with the policy.
But given the conditions, it can't comply because it has no, according to planners, it has not been occupied. Therefore, it cannot go ahead.
Well, I mean, I suppose a different use could potentially comply. There's obviously exceptions within the policy, but we sometimes grant permission for houses where there's an essential need. And it's difficult to see what that would be, or a non-residential use, I suppose. But I mean, it's the walls that remain. So yeah, there's a presumption against development. So.
And how definite is the policy of replacement area for area, or one for one in terms of the footprint area? I mean, how much variation can one do on that? Because I mean, let me put my hand. Let me say what I'm thinking. I mean, the house proposed, assuming we allow it to happen, is 1.5 stories, quite small, which is a bloody waste of space. I mean, it's an area where a really good, substantially designed, one architect building could be built, consistent with the countryside and its total rural dimension. I mean, if we just build a rather boring, as the proposal is, rather boring 1.5, 3-bedroom house, whatever it is, it's a complete waste of opportunity in my mind.
So is that, are you asking a question there, Tom?
Probably,
in
a way I am. I'm asking, are there opportunities? What do we have to allow a sensible solution to this site? Because it's difficult. Because if you're not going to build the house, and then it just becomes a tip and yet another ruined building sitting around in the woods, whatever, which is a pity.
I mean, the current policy would require the house to have been occupied for the replacement house criteria to apply, and even in the proposed plan, it's whether you consider it to be an existing house in a poor state when it's only the walls remaining. That's
there's also an inconsistency here because as far as I understand, rights of way required a 20-year situation. I mean, you have the right to go through somewhere if you've done it previous 20 years, where this policy is 5 years, which is totally different. So there's a sort of complete contrast of conflict there.
I mean, right of ways, separate legislation. This would be. This is a policy in our local plan, so it's.
Can I maybe ask then, just Tom, if you mind, I'll pop in at this stage. In terms of, there seems to be, I was just trying to find it in the report. It was obviously quite a lengthy report, but in terms of the presumption that the applicant has taken that there would be a pretty good chance of getting a house on this site from pre-app discussions, which you alluded to, there had been 2 lots in 2013 and 2017. I can't quite find it in the report. So I suppose, I think it's probably getting back to Councillor Mason's point, is when does this become acceptable in terms of, if you look at the reasons for refusal, obviously the access to sort of sustainable transport and stuff, we're assuming that they won't be on their bikes, so we're assuming they'll need to use a car and things such as that. So we're making certain assumptions, but if one of the cruxes about access to sustainable transport, how would that change in terms of making it an acceptable house there, because that will be a remaining fact. You're not moving the house and you're not suddenly going to put a road through there. Well, hopefully we're not putting roads through there. So I'm just not quite sure if that is one of the criteria that they would have to meet, how they could. There's no objections from roads. There's no objections from any of the consultees. And I'm just a bit concerned that they seem to have some sort of view that they've been given a presumption that this could be a replacement house. And now they feel that we've kind of turned on its head. So it's just to try and understand where the paths have split, shall we say.
The 2017 advice, I mean, we wouldn't normally go into it in detail in a report.
Yeah.
The 2017 advice was that this was contrary to policy and wouldn't be acceptable. Prior to that, I think it was around 2013.
Yeah.
I think we may have said that the design of house was probably appropriate within a greenbelt as a design.
Yeah.
And obviously we were closer at that point to the time when it had been last occupied. So I think that's what accounts for the change of advice over time.
Okay.
That the house remained, well, the former house.
In terms of the supplementary guidance, obviously the current plan has lapsed, and we're just transitioning into the new proposed plan. So in terms of the proposed plan's reference to replacements houses, I felt that you suggested there might have been a slight change in the wording on that. Is there?
There has been a change, which is the reference to replacement of houses in poor condition on a 1-for-1 basis. So that's, I mean, it's a fairly subtle change because we don't sort of refer to houses in poor condition, particularly in the current plan. But in terms of weight of the policy of the extant plan and the proposed plan, you know, it's still going through inquiry process, so we are still putting weight on the adopted plan.
Okay. Tom, did you want to, or sorry, Sandra, did you want to come back in?
I just want to understand this reference to, you know, a house that is in poor condition versus something that is abandoned. And, you know, my personal view is that this, you know, this site is starting to be taken back by nature, and it will, you know, that process, as I think Tom alluded to as well, will continue. And you know, every year that goes past when the fire happened in 2008 is, you know, that process goes on. And I guess, I don't know it's a sort of thought that I had about, you know, would there be some sort of you know, new living business opportunity for something in a site like that. But I'm not seeing the boxes being ticked for me in terms of the policies that we have in place at the moment and making this into a home for someone to live in. It doesn't fit well with the policies and the planning framework that we have at the moment is what I'm kind of moving towards.
Councillor Mason, Tom?
Yes, I mean that's the problem. All the plans we have are really for urban development, not for sites like this. I just want to see some mechanisms to make sure that the site gets developed or not developed in an appropriate fashion, which is meaningful. I mean, presumably is important to the owner of the property, or there's the proposition, because without this permission, it is virtually worthless. With permission, it's worth a house build. I mean, it probably won't make any money on it because the cost of building will be almost the same as the value. But
I mean, it's quite. Is there any other questions at the moment? we can maybe just sort of talk it through, and we'll come back to you if there's anything in terms of further questions that come out from our discussions. You know, I can understand why they may wish to develop it, given there was previously a house on there, and we're not talking about 1800s, we're talking about 2008 when it was last occupied. So if there hadn't been the fire, somebody could still have been living there today, but obviously they're not living there. And I actually quite like the design with the larch, and I think it will disappear into the woodland, you know, and I can't actually see a different purpose for that site, because one of the policies is about the intrusion of traffic to it. So what you wouldn't want to really do is create a business there, which actually potentially would increase more traffic along the access route. Part of the route we've heard is not even within the application site, and really within our gift to do much about, is my understanding from the screen, because it's actually it's the forestry, and they would have to go through a separate negotiation. So, you know, technically we could say this is, you know, fine, but however there still could be a stumbling block for them in terms of for their access. That would be on a separate negotiation away from the actual planning permission, because we can't give them permission over that area. You know, it's the waste. I mean, the fact that waste haven't objected to it, the roads haven't objected, SEPA haven't objected, the HSE, all of those haven't objected to it. So I think principally what we're looking at is, do we accept that this is a replacement house for, it's definitely a poor quality house. But, you know, are we saying that this is a ruin that shouldn't be replaced, or are we saying that there is an opportunity to have this re-inhabited by building a new house that obviously, you know, you've seen the sun, what do you call them, the panels on the roof, you know, we've got a septic tank, soakaway, etc. You know, so there's elements obviously of sustainability around that. It's just obviously there's going to have to be a tanker to come in and empty the septic tank. There is a few trees that will be lost, and I think they would, you know, if there was any intention of approving this, perhaps we might need certain conditions around this application, which we would obviously seek guidance from our planning colleagues. But I think in principle we have to probably feel comfortable that the replacement house is something that we would want to see on the site. I think is the crux of the matter, and then kind of, I suppose, pedal back from there and say, well, if we agree that it could be a house, what about, are we comfortable with the access, which seems to be the other one, and do we feel that it would conflict with policies NE9, which is the access and informal recreation. You know, now we know that in wooded areas owned by the forestry that they have traffic moving around, and given it's one house, I'm not sure that there'd be a huge intensification of traffic on that route. However, you know, when you're in a kind of a woodland setting, do you expect any traffic? You know, so one is sometimes unexpected. So I think perhaps I would suggest that it's quite a meaty application. If we maybe get to the principle of, do we feel that a replacement house is justified one for one on the site, might be helpful. Councillor Mason, do you want to kick off? Poor Councillor MacDonald keeps getting put first.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with your analysis there. The decision really is whether we do, if the building had been lived in without the fire, it would still be occupied, and there would be, presumably whoever lived there would have a car, and therefore replacing it is not any different to what it otherwise would have been. Okay. And therefore, which would imply we should be allowing the building to go ahead on a one-for-one basis. However, having said that, I come back to this opportunity for doing something better than just a one-for-one, because the traditional narrow building on one-for-one footprint is not very sensible in the modern era in terms of living accommodation and size. And if we're building a house, we should be able to be slightly more effective in allowing more people to live there. Not a great minimum, but to a greater flexibility, because a house of that size is not particularly useful for a large family. I mean,
Yeah, I would just say though that the applicant, when they looked to develop it, were aware of that, limitation, shall we say. Councillor MacDonald, do you want to?
I think on balance, I have seen no need established for returning this shell to a home. And, living is very different now to even what it was in 2008. And, there's not just, I wouldn't assume that would just be one car, or that there wouldn't be Amazon vans going to deliver, internet shopping, or supermarket vans going to deliver messages and all the rest of it. And I just think there is that that material change and the conflict with the use of the forest, I think takes us into a different era. And I would not be in favour. I think as a point of principle, as Mary pointed out, I just do not. And I would be going with the officer's recommendation to refuse.
Okay. Tom, do you want to come back with anything?
no, just think that that I understand where you're coming from, but I mean, to me, it's a bit of a luxury we've got because of a fire, because it's not occupied. Therefore, we're not able to eliminate this property from the earth. Basically, that's what we're doing. And we're left with a patch in the forest, which the only thing we can do is let the Forestry Commission plant some trees, which they won't do on places where there's a ruined building, because they can't afford to clean it up, or whatever, or they won't clean it up. So
I think they'll probably just let nature have it back. Actually,
well, they probably will, but then nature, that's fine. But I mean, that is the dilemma. I mean, do we have the God-given right to stop a building continuing or not? Which was,
well, it's not so much a God-given right. I think it's policy.
Well, wisdom of Solomon and all the rest of it. But I mean, I'm still open-minded on it at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I think my struggle is the fact that it could have been occupied if there hadn't been the fire in 2008. Sure. That's my biggest challenge. As I say, if this had been a ruin that hadn't been occupied for the last 50, 100 years, or even 25 years, you could actually say, well, actually, it's now just become part of the fabric of the forest, if you like. But, if you look at it, whilst it looks pretty derelict, it was a home, within the last sort of 20 years. It wasn't like it hadn't existed. It wasn't occupied. I mean, I don't know who occupied it, but, the fact that it was occupied, and it's irrelevant who was probably in it, unless it was particularly built for some forestry, purpose. I hear what Councillor MacDonald's saying as well, Sandra, about the additional traffic now that families have in terms of home deliveries. They probably wouldn't get them. They'll have to go to the car park. So, there are challenges around this, and, whether they would, I'm not so concerned about the conflict around sort of any impact on the trees, because there's obviously a huge number of trees there. So I think, I'm kind of comfortable that can easily be mitigated. And again, sustainability, I mean, we're naturally assuming somebody who wants to live there will have a car and won't be on a bike, for instance, and that it will create a dependency on cars. But I've seen far larger developments that have ended up dependent on cars because of the lack of bus services. So, that there is always going to be that challenge. Although this one is far clearer that, they're not likely to get a bus suddenly appearing down their track. But, technically, I suppose they could go up to the main road and get onto public transport. So I'm finding it quite hard, because I like the idea of this kind of, I suppose, almost woodland house. I like the way that they've sympathetically, because it could be, not being derogatory about the style of it, but it could be a wood barn in a woodland setting. and it's far enough away from, if you like, the beaten track that it shouldn't. I don't think it would detract from anybody's enjoyment of the area. And I think perhaps somebody who would want to live in this house would be very much at home with nature, as opposed to wanting that kind of urban lifestyle. But I suppose it's just how it relates to our policies and the tensions that it has. And that's what I keep having to come back to. Is the tensions against our policies greater than the right of a one-for-one replacement? So I think that's probably where I'm still juggling it in my mind. And, you know, regardless of whether they can get the agreement with the forestry in terms of access, you know, that's out with the, if you like, the red line that we're looking at today, and would be something, and I'm assuming I'm correct on that, Ms. Green, would be something for a matter between the forestry and the applicant.
Yes, that's right. I mean, my understanding is that they can get access, but to sort of facilitate that link that makes it more direct, that would be between forestry and the applicant.
Okay. Right, members. I think, has anybody got any other questions for Ms. Green before we going to try and wrap this up? No. Okay, I'll go. Councillor McDonald. Sandra, would you like just to give your decision?
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting and different application to some that I've had to consider. But we have looked at the Greenbelt at various local review body meetings, and you know, I've lived in the Northeast long enough to know I've seen sites that have been abandoned in forests or even in fields, and you know, there's always that history and that family connection perhaps to them, and that can generate you know, a wish to redevelop. In this particular case, I think the planning guidance and framework does come down not you know, well, fairly strongly in my view to refusing this application, and particularly around the need for the house. I don't have a strong view on the design, and so on. It was more that higher view that I took, that the time has passed, and I think in this case I would be saying to go with the officer's original recommendation to refuse.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McDonald. Councillor Mason.
I think on balance, I'm in favour of letting this one go through. And it is narrow balance, and you know, as I say, it's the wisdom of Solomon here. I mean, there is I think if done correctly, that would be a worthy site, and the forest in generally would. Even the people using the forest would benefit from the fact that somebody is there looking after the forest, as opposed to being totally inert of people. So I think I would like this to go ahead.
Okay, so I get the choice. Well, we've got policies. They're obviously there to give us as much guidance and to try and direct us as much as possible. And you know, and when we're overriding policies, we have to say, is there some reason that outweighs the policies for us to go in a particular direction? For me, I suppose it's trying to balance in my mind if the fact that there's been a house there and that could still exist there if there hadn't been the fire is what's challenging my view. And, you know, I think, you know, if there was to be approval, there would be probably need to be a number of conditions which we would have to have brought back to us, because I don't want to make the conditions, if we were minded to go ahead with this today, on the hoof, because I think they will be quite complicated. And, you know, policies or conditions are not set out to stop the development happening, but when you're in I would say a difficult location with a number of challenges in terms of particularly protecting the green belt and the informal recreational use by others, we would have to be very careful about the conditions that were put in place in terms of the development and getting underway, and also any things to make sure it enhanced the environment and the surroundings and not to detract or destroy anything. So I would be minded to allow this to happen, and it's purely the only thing that's kind of putting me this way is the fact that there was an existing use in 2008, and 2008 in real terms is not that long ago, and it would be continued to be occupied if it hadn't been for the fire. But I think there does need to be a number of conditions around this application, and as I say, I wouldn't like just to make them up right now, and I would want Miss Green to come back with the conditions that she thought would be appropriate. I'm not saying I don't have conditions in terms of or concerns, should I say, around some of the comments made by officers, but for me, I think the overriding factor which has, as I say, challenged me over this application is the fact that it was occupied as a dwelling as recently as 2008, and I know that's out with the 5-year, but I think the last few years nobody's been doing anything with property, and there has been pre-application discussions in 2013 which gave an indication that something could happen. Okay, 2017 it wasn't quite such a positive, a positive pre-application discussion. However, this is why we're here to kind of act as that intermediate. We've got officers who will view the guidance and policies in one way, and it's for us to kind of play that, I suppose, in some ways, a check and balance. And it's, as I say, with the right conditions, I would be minded to allow this 1 for 1, not 1 for any more, Councillor Mason, just 1 for 1, because there had been a house occupied as recently as 2008, and it was only vacated because of the fire, is my understanding from reading the report, and hopefully I'm not misleading anybody by saying that, but that's my reading of the report in front of us. So, Ms. Green, can I ask you about, in terms of types of conditions that you would be looking to attach to this? I'm not asking you to be hard and fast today, but just the types of things that you think would be appropriate. I know you're a seasoned professional, so you'll be able to advise accordingly.
Yes, I think there could be conditions on tree protection, potentially tree planting, landscaping, boundary treatments, that the requirements of the flood risk assessment were complied with. I think that's in terms of the level at which the house would be set. There would be SUDS as a potential condition, so sustainable urban drainage. Materials could be covered by condition. We could look at reuse of some of the granite from the cottage on site, and minimisation of water usage in terms of the policy on that. That's what I would suggest would be covered, but I'd come back with the actual draft.
Convener, could some conditions be included in terms of sustainability of heating, being carbon neutral? I mean, it's an ideal spot for heat pumps, ground heat pumps, and plenty of space.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we then just tidy up on this then, so just for completeness, I'll just ask us to restate where we are with our decision. Councillor MacDonald.
Refuse the application.
Okay, Councillor Mason.
Allow with the conditions as discussed.
Okay. And as I say, it's been a difficult decision, and it's purely on the grounds that there was an existing house in 2008 that was occupied. I would again move that we approve the house, but with conditions to come be attached, and to Ms. Green to circulate that to all of us for agreement. Okay. Mr. Masson, is that content for you?
Yeah, that was nice and clear. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Councillor MacDonald, I believe you will be leaving us now, and thank you very much for your attendance today. Nice to see you. Bye.
Thank you, goodbye.
And I think we've got Councillor Bell joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning, Councillor Bell.
This
Okay.
technology is marvellous.
Isn't it just? I bet
Isn't
you
it?
wish you could make us disappear that easily, eh, Mark? Okay. Right, thanks, folks. Right, now turning to consideration of the third review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the change of use from amenity to garden ground at 25 Seaview Road, Seaview Place, Aberdeen, planning reference 211307/DPP. We will again hear from the planning advisor, Ms. Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would again point out that Ms. Green attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance, but she's not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Ms. Green will not, however, be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect, her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. And handing over to you, Ms. Green.
Thank you, convener. I will share my presentation. Just one moment. Can you see that? Good. Okay, this request is for review against an application refused under delegated powers for the change of use from amenity land to garden ground at 25 Seaview Place. And the review has been submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. The applicant has indicated that there are no new matters raised in the review submissions. And in terms of procedure by which the review will be conducted, the applicant has expressed the view that a site visit should be carried out in order to view the site, and that the review shouldn't proceed only on the basis of the information provided. So I will provide some background information before handing back to the convener for members to decide how to proceed. So this is the application site, just at the end of the garden ground of 25 Seaview Place. It's part of a wider area of open space that was laid out as part of a large residential development in 1995. And it includes a small section of an informal footpath, which is described as being little used by people and is overgrown. So that's the footpath just shown in grey. To the south is the garden of 25 Seaview Place, which is bounded by timber fencing. That's a 2-storey house within a row of similar houses. And with the exception of number 34, which is at the end here, none of these houses have been extended into the open space. The north boundary of the site is formed by a dry stone dyke, which is just outside the red line. And to the east and west of the area in question, there are shrubs and natural grassland and vegetation. In terms of the planning history, there's no recent history on this particular site, but as I mentioned, it formed part of a housing development which was approved in '95. And on that approval, there was a condition which required that the dry stone dyke should be stabilised in order to preserve it. There have been some similar applications nearby, So there was the change of use at number 34, which is the subject of enforcement action currently. There was an application refused for change of use of amenity land at number 12. There was one for change of use at number 9, which was approved. At number 12, there was a further application where the decision was upheld at LRB, the refusal. Then there was a further application refused in 2016 at Seaview Avenue. So the proposal is for the change of use of the area from amenity space to garden. There are no physical works proposed within the application. That's the aerial view of the site, and the area in question, just shown by the arrow there. The 3D view, you can see that the vegetation in that particular section has been removed, but remains along the rear of the other gardens. This was in the submissions. It's quite difficult to read on the presentation, and when I've tried enlarging the photographs, they're not particularly clear, so I won't do that or go through where the photographs are taken, but I think members will have had the chance to have a look at that. So reasons for the decision, which are stated in full in the decision notice. So the key points were the adverse impact on biodiversity, with the open space audit including this site and showing it to be of value. Loss of part of the public open space and the impact on amenity and the character of the area. The impact on the wider space by creating the irregular boundary and constraining the maintenance of the stone dyke. There's the precedent which this would cause. Potentially there would be a cumulative erosion of the open space, and the proposal would be contrary to policies on open space, design, landscape, natural heritage, residential areas, granite heritage, and the Householder Design Guide, as well as references to national advice on open space and the policies in the proposed plan. And finally, that the adverse impact couldn't be mitigated with design or conditions, and it being contrary to the public interest in the longer term to allow conversion of the garden to private space. Turning to the appellant's case, this was set out in a statement of review which is within the agenda but can be summarised as the proposal wouldn't result in the loss of an area that's of value for amenity, recreation, landscape or wildlife, and that it would improve the quality of life for the occupiers, that it complies with the strategic development plan, that the proposal satisfies the criteria in the Household Design Guide for change of use of amenity ground and therefore accords with policy H1, that the proposal complies with the various other policies on design, landscape, granite heritage, the green space network and natural heritage and access, that it's supported by national policy as it contributes to sustainable development, supports the health and well-being of the occupier and open space policy, and that the informal footpath which previously crossed the site is now disused and overgrown and an alternative exists. In terms of consultations, there was no response received from the Community Council and there are no representations. So at this point I'll hand back to you, convener, for the panel to decide how you wish to proceed.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Green. We've obviously heard, members, that the applicant has suggested that we take a site inspection, but if you feel you have sufficient information, clearly that's a decision for yourselves. Councillor Bell, hot seat first.
I think there's plenty of information, thank you, so I wouldn't be advocating a site visit. Thank you, convener.
Thank you. Councillor Mason? You're on mute, Tom.
My apologies. No, I think I'm content with the information we've got. It's fairly extensive and not too complex.
Okay, thank you. And I'm likewise. So given that we feel we've all got sufficient information, we'll ask Ms. Green to go through the policies, please.
Thank you. Sorry, I'll just get that presentation back up. Okay. So the site is zoned within the residential area policy H1. The various criteria that are relevant within that policy are: would the proposal have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the area? Would it result in the loss of open space? And does it comply with supplementary guidance? In particular, the household development guide in this particular case. The householder design guide has particular advice in terms of these types of change of use, and I've just highlighted some of that. So the criteria for assessing proposals like this, in particular, would the proposal have an adverse impact on amenity space, which makes a worthwhile contribution to the character and amenity of the area? Would it fragment, or if replicated, be likely to incrementally erode large areas of public open space or landscaping? Moving on to the next slide, would there be an irregular boundary layout that would be out of keeping with an otherwise uniform character in the area? And would the proposal result in the narrowing of footpaths and views along footpaths, making them less inviting? And also the question of, does it set a precedent that would make it difficult to resist similar proposals? And there are various other policies which are also relevant. The Green Space Network, so this site provides a link between larger open spaces, and I've just added this slide which shows the Green Space Network designation and the properties just here, if you can see my pointer. So there's this narrow strip of the Green Space Network which links larger areas. Going back to the other policies, urban green space policy is similar in effect in this case to the residential areas policy in terms of the loss of areas of open space. Other policies encourage the protection of open space, natural habitats and paths, as well as the landscape character of the area. Although the site's not covered by a specific designation in terms of natural heritage, policy NE8 states that non-designated areas should be protected and enhanced. Scottish planning policy is also referred to, and it aims to significantly enhance green infrastructure works. And then there's the planning advice note on open space, which aims to avoid the loss of wider areas of open space. And finally, policy D5, which seeks to protect granite structures. And the case officer has noted that this would make maintenance of the stone dyke more difficult. So moving on to points for consideration. As before, members should have regard to the local development plan policies and any other material considerations that are relevant. And the following points are particularly for consideration. Do members consider that the proposed change of use would adversely affect the character or amenity of the area as set out in policy each one? And would the change of use to private garden ground comply with the householder design guide? And the other considerations of biodiversity, access, recreation, landscape character, loss of open space, and the precedent that would be set. And overall, does the proposal comply with the development plan, or are there material considerations that would weigh for or against the proposal? I'd be happy to answer any further questions. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ms Green. Councillor Mason, are you trying to speak? You've got your mic on, mic off, should I say.
Just one question. Can you elaborate on the process on the number 34, the reinstatement?
I don't have a lot of detail on that. It's been, the application was refused and is going through an enforcement process. Let me just.
What does that mean?
In notes, we've served an enforcement notice and that's been appealed by the applicant, and that appeal, we don't have the result of that.
Okay, and the enforcement notice was for what? To take back the land from immediately reinstate?
Well, I mean, land ownership would be a separate matter, but it wouldn't be part of the private garden ground. So if, for example, the permitted development rights that would apply if someone had a change of use to garden ground would allow them to do things like potentially erect some form of boundary enclosure or sheds, etc., hard surfacing. So setting aside the land ownership issue, it would just remain, if this case was lost by the applicant, it would remain essentially part of the public open space, although they would own it.
So at the moment it would imply that they've encroached on the amenity, and this is a pushback.
Yes, they would put in an application which was refused to change. Yeah.
I seem to remember I was on the appeal for that, whatever.
There's been that many, isn't there, Tom?
Yeah. And I'm just trying to clarify what stage it's got to. Okay, yeah. I understand. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Lena. Yes, I've got a couple of questions. So for Ms Green, if we look at page 158 in the pack, please, that's of interest to my questions. So are you going to bring this up? Well, I mean, we can turn to it, but
yeah, I can. Get to that. Right, so 3D images. Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Just a second. Going a bit slow at the moment.
It's a bit like me.
So many windows open, I think.
Great.
Yeah.
So can I just orient myself, please? Is the arrow actually to the north of the house?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So okay. So my questions really are: do we know why the trees have been removed in that section? Could it? What I would posit would be that because that is north facing, it makes the property very dark. So the trees have been removed to actually allow more light in. But do we know who actually removed the trees and when?
I don't know when they were removed. But it's to the north of the property, so it wouldn't prevent sunlight. I could guess that the applicant may already own the land and have removed the trees because they own it, whereas the other, I don't know this for, okay. I suspect that that's what's happened.
Okay, all right then. Okay, Do we know what the ground is actually being used for? It looks like it's very hard to discern what it's actually doing.
It's just part of a wider open space and
okay, so it's just scrubland.
Protected.
Just scrubland.
Well,
okay, so the next question is the dike being maintained?
I mean, the condition would have required it to have been brought up to a certain standard. I'm not aware of whether it's has currently, regular maintenance, because I'm not sure what would be needed as such. It would
right, but it's standing, because I mean my understanding of a stone dike is it's there to actually delineate common ground to stop animals wandering and people wandering, but stone dikes have been built traditionally where it's very windy. So you get this sort of effect from wind, where it actually pounds a solid wall. So the stone dike is actually quite important. Okay, thanks very much indeed. That's all I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mason, have you got, excuse me, any questions? You're still on mute, Tom. Sorry, I thought you were just trying to get yourself off.
You're still on mute, Councillor Mason.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had some technical problems there.
I thought that was maybe what was happening.
No, well, oh, too many screens open at the same time. Right. No, I'm content. I think I'm clear what the situation is.
Okay.
This time.
All right. Thank you. All right, if there's no more questions for Ms. Green, if we can go in, obviously the application is up for refusal and the applicant is looking to appeal this decision. Councillor Mason, have you got a view?
No, I think, I mean, this is the only house that has been seeking extension, the amenities, whatever. Yes, the path is overgrown, but that's circumstance in terms of the council clearing the path or deeming to clear the path as necessary, and so that to me is not a reason for encroaching, and no other house along there has been allowed to, or even asked to extend their garden into the amenity space, and if we allow one, the whole lot will start wanting to move forward, including number 34 at the end. And so I think we have to draw a line at this point and say no, and amenity is amenity and should remain where possible as such.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Convener. Well, I'm actually looking at page 168 of the pack, and it says that change of so 180365 DPP for number 12 was change of use from amenity land to garden ground and the erection of house extension at 12 Seaview Place. That was refused. There was one at 9 Seaview Place, change of use from amenity land to garden ground. That was actually approved, but that's actually on a corner, which is interesting. Another one for number 12, that was refused, and also so 2 at number 12 refused, and also a fence was wanted to be put up, another one that was refused. But I think I mean the point really that I want to make is that the council are actually making great store of biodiversity. Indeed, they actually, the last biodiversity report was actually submitted very recently, and that's for the period 2018 to 2020. It's actually a statutory obligation of the authority to maintain biodiversity, and I think that this could well be the thin end of the wedge if this were allowed to become, a garden to be honest, it would actually break up the amenity, would break up the biodiversity, which the council are very keen to actually push forward. So for that reason, I would want to uphold the officer's decision. Thank you.
I think we're unanimous on this. I think it would erode. I think does make the area more fragmented. It would break it would create an irregular boundary line. And as such, I mean, obviously there has been some sort of clearing of trees or shrubs, whatever, in that particular element. But that, regardless of that, I think to do anything different, sorry, whoever's got their hand up, you can't come in. This is members only. I think that was explained. So regardless of whether they own that piece of land, I think that, when you include it into garden land, the problem you have is then permitted garden development rights, which again, we heard from Ms. Green, she alluded to, which can then allow structures, etc., to be put into the garden. So, I'm quite comfortable that the officers have had a consistent approach. I know that we've heard that number 9 was approved, but we've got to take each application on its own merits and look at the rationale for that decision. And I think that H1, the residential policy, and the supplementary guidance, and NE8 and NE9, NE3, all of these, and NE1, all of these policies are relevant, and I don't see any reason to deviate from the decision of the officer. So if we're content, I'll just get us to formally give our view, and I'll get start with yourself again, Councillor Mason, just for Mark's benefit. You're still on mute.
Screen problems again.
Okay.
No, I think I support the officer's decision here and refuse the appeal.
Okay, Councillor Bell.
Yeah, just to reiterate what I said a wee bit earlier, habitat is important. Council are trying to promote habitat diversity, and this would potentially be the thin end of the wedge. I think we've actually seen applications made to extend houses, to have other gardens, and it would actually break up the biodiversity. So I would, as I said a wee bit earlier, I'd be more than happy to uphold the officer's decision. Thank you.
And again, I'd be upholding the officer's decision for the reasons stated in the report. So, Mr. Masson, are you content with that?
Yes, that's fine. That was a 3-0 unanimous decision.
Okay, all right, thanks very much, Mr. Manson. Okay, if we could now turn to consideration of the fourth and final review today in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the installation of bifold doors and the formation of side door openings retrospectively at 35 Carden Place, Aberdeen, planning reference 211766/DPP. We will again hear from the planning advisor, Ms. Green, who will provide us with a brief description and application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would again point out that Ms. Green attends today because today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance, because she has not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Ms. Green will not, however, be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Over to yourself, Ms. Green.
Thank you, convener. I will put my presentation on the screen.
That's perfect there. Thank you.
Right, let me just get my... Right, thank you. This is the request for review against an application refused under delegated powers for the retrospective installation of bifold doors and the formation of a side door opening at 35 Carden Place. Review was submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months from the decision of the appointed officer. And the applicant indicated that there were no new matters raised in the review submissions. In terms of procedure by which the review should be conducted, the applicant has expressed the view that the review should proceed on the basis of a site visit in addition to the information provided. So I'll provide some background information to the case before handing back for a decision on how to proceed. So the application site consists of the Category B listed building at 35 Carden Place within the Albine Place and Ruberslaw Conservation Area. And that's an aerial shot of the house, and the doors are in this elevation of the extension to the rear. A 3D image. This actually shows the former extension, which has now been replaced with a flat roofed structure, which is shown in this photograph here. So these are the doors in question. That's just taken from street view. Obviously the extension hadn't been built at that point, and there is, well, as I'll cover in a moment, there's a permission exists for a garage onto the rear lane. So in terms of planning history, there are the applications for planning permission and listed building consent for the erection of the single-storey rear extension that you can see there. And that application also included a dormer and the installation of a replacement garage and carport to the rear. Similar listed building consent. So those applications were granted permission for the extension that exists, with conditions requiring the details of materials to be submitted. In terms of the proposal, as noted previously, the consent was granted in August 2020 for the erection of the single-storey extension, and those have since been completed. The extension projects 3.3 metres from the rear of the existing 1.5-storey extension, and it measures 5.2 metres in width as per the approved plans. And consent was granted for glazing to be on the west and south elevations, comprising the 3.2 metre wide sliding doors and also a 1 metre wide full height window. The windows within the proposal were stated to be timber framed, and no details were provided regarding the framing material of the bifold door. Thus, the consent was granted subject to conditions, including one which stated no development shall take place unless details of the materials for the proposed bifolding doors have been submitted and approved, etc. So there were no details submitted, and the approximately 3.8 metre wide bifold doors in UPVC were installed on the south elevation, and also a 1 metre wide single entrance door in UPVC on the west elevation. You can see those two on these drawings, the doorway and the bifold doors. In terms of reasons for refusal, these are obviously stated in full in the agenda, but the key points were the impact on the Category B listed building, the impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area, and that the proposal would therefore be contrary to the various policies listed there, including Scottish Planning Policy, Historic Environment Policy for Scotland, the Managing Change Guidance produced by HES, policies in the Local Development Plan on Historic Environment, Residential Areas and Design, and also the Supplementary Guidance and similar policies within the proposed plan. turning to the applicant's case, the central points that they make are that the new extension is granite block, whilst the old extension was hauled brick. The original extension was an eyesore which detracted from the listed building and conservation area. That the new UPVC doors blend in with the existing UPVC window in the mezzanine bedroom on the gable. That the UPVC doors won't be seen once the full width garage is completed. That precedent exists for the use of UPVC at the rear of listed buildings, including both immediate neighbours. That the proposal is not contrary to national and local policies quoted, and that the impact of enforcement action would be to require the disposal of the UPVC doors, which has an environmental impact. In terms of consultations, there were no comments received from the Queen's Cross and Harlaw Community Council, and there were no representations. So I'll now hand back to you, convener, for the panel to decide how they wish to proceed.
Okay, members, we've obviously there's been a suggestion by the applicant that he thinks we should take a site visit. Councillor Bell.
Convener, I'm happy with the information that we have. I wouldn't advocate a site visit. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Mason. You're on mute.
Content with the information we have at the moment.
Okay, I am equally. I'm satisfied with the photographs. So if we could continue, and Ms. Green, if you could then take us through the policies, please.
Yes, okay, I'll just do that. So the site lies within an area zoned under policy H1, where proposals for new development are considered if they comply with a number of criteria, and those are the ones relating to the character and amenity of the surrounding area and referring to supplementary guidance. Those are the one points of relevance. So I've just highlighted the supplementary guidance on this slide. Although it relates more to replacement windows, it does state that UPVC is not acceptable in listed buildings. And there's also the managing change guidance from Historic Environment Scotland, which relates to extensions and refers to using appropriate materials. We have the design policy, which you're familiar with, and requires development of a high standard which relates to its context. And Historic Environment Policy, which states that the council will protect, preserve and enhance historic environment in line with national and local policy and guidance, and also refers to high quality design that respects the character, appearance and setting of the historic environment, and including listed buildings and conservation areas. In terms of Scottish planning policy, it states that changes to listed buildings should protect their character, and that proposals in conservation areas should preserve and enhance the character of those areas. The conservation area character appraisal for the Albine Place conservation area, it notes a negative factor within this area being the use of UPVC windows. So moving on to the final slide, members should have regard to the local development plan, policies and any other material considerations that they feel are relevant to the application and that would point to either overturning the original decision or dismissing the review. And the key points of relevance are the zoning within the H1 area, do the proposed works impact on amenity of the area? Do they protect the special character of the listed building and preserve or enhance the character and amenity of the conservation area as required by SPP, the Historic Environment Scotland policy statement, and the policies relating to the historic environment? And is the design of sufficient quality? And overall, does the proposal comply with the development plan, or are there material considerations weighing for or against the proposal? And I'd be happy to answer any further questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Green. Could I just, before we get into some questions, could I just get you to take up the photograph of the new extension for me, please?
Yeah.
At the bottom, my master, why do you just take that to the bit? What is all the issue? This is more.
Can I just ask, it said something about one of the windows had already been replaced in the back with new PVC. Which one would that be? Is that the one just above the extension?
Yes, that's the one they're referring to there.
Okay. There's not a picture of the side door, is there? I think I can see it inside actually, because I can see it open, but I didn't.
Yeah, I think it's just the drawing.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, that's fine. All right, members, Councillor Bell, have you got some questions?
Yes, Convener, I've got a couple. First of all, could we just look at page 232 of the pack, please? Because it actually, I'm just slightly confused by this comment. So it speaks about negative factors issues, general built environment, okay, fine, thick frame UPVC, but it also makes mention of the inappropriate placement of satellite dishes and burglar alarms is also a concern. I didn't pick those up on the picture.
Right, sorry, this is the document, the character appraisal of the conservation area. So it's talking about the conservation area in general. So
it's just a general comment. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So so going back then, I'm sorry. So going back to page 224 then. I'm sorry to muck you around.
Okay.
So this is a picture of the back, and it shows a skip with lots of bags in. It shows some tatty doors. I just really wanted to get a general feel of the area, as it were.
So I think we would like to see the picture again.
yeah, exactly.
We like pictures, eh?
We like pictures, yeah.
Yeah, next one. Here we go.
There we go. So there is to be a new garage built, I think, isn't there?
Yes, that was approved under the same permission as the extension.
Right. So so can you tell us, please, if it will actually take away the rusting doors that we see to the immediate right of the skip?
Well, if it's implemented, yes, it would.
Okay.
Move all that area of wall and the gates. It would extend across the full width of the plot.
Right. Okay. Across the full width.
The garage.
Oh, I see. Okay. And then you right. And if that happened, you wouldn't actually see the bifolding doors as well.
Not from this vantage point. No.
Not from that view. No. No. Okay. Thanks. That's really what I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Councillor Mason.
Yes, Convener, thank you. Am I right in saying that the lane with the skips is backing onto the Queen's Road on Rubestar? Anyway, office blocks developments, as it were, in Queen's Road, whatever, which are high level and look down on the gardens at the back of Carden Place. I
believe so. Yes, there are. It is the rear of office buildings, and I then can go on to Google if you want me to do that.
Could you do that for me, please?
Yeah.
Does that help, Councillor Mason?
Yeah, so the building's at the bottom, so you go across the lane, and then there's a car park, the stripy looking car park, and then there's the buildings there. That's Albine Terrace, right?
Yes. Do you want to see the 3D view there?
Yeah. So those go, if I'm right saying that the extension could be fairly clearly seen from those windows.
Let's see, there's the rear of this building.
Yeah.
And then there's that coach house. Yeah, so that's the rear of the extension there.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
And the other question I have is was there any consultation on they had a condition they had to show the materials before they used them? Was it any sign that they showed them and it was refused, or just they never bothered to have them cleared? Is that?
Yeah, my understanding is that they didn't submit details of materials.
And that was part of the planning permission?
That was a condition on the planning permission, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Right. Is that you finished, Councillor Mason? Yeah.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, members, if there's no other questions for Ms. Green, if we can maybe just go into discuss the application. Whilst I always dislike when people don't stick to the conditions, I think, you know, we'll have to look at what the result has been of that lack of sticking to the condition, i.e. submitting the materials in advance. I actually don't mind it. I think it ties in actually well with the rest of the house. I think that it's going to be obscured by a double garage when and if that application, that building is constructed, because it's got planning permission. If you look along that back row, immediately adjacent to it is a very modern extension to the rear. I don't think it detracts from the character of the area, and I don't think it has a big impact. You know, the fact that the bifold doors are white, I think it ties in with the windows, and I think potentially you'd have to be up pretty close to be able to see that it wasn't, or to take offence from it, shall we say. I actually think it's okay. As I say, I'm not very happy that they didn't comply with the condition. However, it'd be a bit petulant for me to suggest that just because they didn't agree with it, stick to the condition. If it had been something like bright red PVC doors or something, out of keeping, but I think the white ties in. It is the rear elevation, and actually the point that you made, Councillor Mason, and I don't know what use you're making of it, but the fact that it actually backs onto car parks of office blocks, you know, I think for me it kind of even seals it more. So I'm quite comfortable actually to approve this with a bit of a slap on the wrist, but you know, I'm content with what they've done. Councillor Bell?
Yes, Convener, thank you. Very disappointing that planning conditions aren't actually met and you know and start with, and I'm very surprised that the architect didn't actually know that and push that through. But I would also go along with your summary, Chair, and so I don't think it detracts. I think the property looks fine, but once again, though, very unhappy that they haven't stuck with the planning requirements.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Yes, I mean the reason I've said the office block. I mean you could see, and I know you can see the back gardens from those office blocks because they're high level buildings. So I think it's 6 floors, some of them. So you can look into those gardens at the back. And the fact that it was part of it wasn't. In fact, it was part of the planning permission in the first place, and they didn't comply with the planning conditions. I think while it could be construed, it's okay to look at. It's totally unfair on other people who make an effort in the area to fulfil the conditions for the conservation area. And there'll be many people in the street who would agree with me. The fact that somebody is allowed to get away with it again, I think is to me is unacceptable, and therefore I would refuse this.
You'd uphold the officer's recommendation. That's what you're saying.
Right.
Okay. Mr. Masson, do you need any more from us?
No, that was clear that it was a 2-to-1 majority for overturning the officer's recommendations. And
I would just say to Ms. Green, if you can pass on to the planner or whoever's dealing with this, that to make the architect or whoever was managing this project know that we're very unhappy that they didn't comply with the conditions, and that it was by a slim majority that his client wasn't penalised. So if you could just pass that on, the conditions are there for a reason and not for their discretion.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, that concludes today's LRB. I'd like to thank Councillor Mason, Councillor Bell for participating today. Councillor Bell